For many, driving late at night is peaceful, offering a calm, quiet escape from the bustling day. But for Michael, a late-night drive turned into an experience that would haunt him forever. Sometimes, the things you encounter on the road are far more terrifying than what you could ever imagine. Michael had been driving home after a long day at work. It was past midnight, and the empty road stretched before him as far as he could see. The radio was on low, playing some old rock tunes, and the only other sound was the hum of his car's engine. He enjoyed the solitude of these night drives. They gave him time to think, to unwind, and let go of the stress of the day. But as he drove down the dark country highway, something strange caught his eye. Up ahead, standing by the side of the road, was a figure. At first, Michael thought it was just his tired mind playing tricks on him. But as he got closer, the figure became clearer, a woman, standing alone in the dark, her thumb raised in a classic hitchhiking gesture. Michael's first instinct was to drive past. It wasn't safe to pick up strangers, especially in the middle of the night. But as he slowed down, he caught a glimpse of the woman's face in his headlights. She looked pale, distressed, and shivering in the cold night air. Her clothes were thin, and she appeared lost. Michael couldn't just leave her there. Against his better judgment, he pulled over and rolled down the window. "Do you need a ride?" he asked, trying to sound casual despite the unease creeping into his gut. The woman nodded silently, her expression distant, almost empty. She climbed into the passenger seat without saying a word, her movements slow and deliberate. Michael noticed her hands were ice cold as she shut the door. He started the car again, glancing over at her. "Where are you headed?" he asked, but the woman just stared straight ahead. She didn't answer. The silence in the car was suffocating. The radio, which had been playing moments ago, was now just static. Michael's unease grew as the woman sat completely still, her eyes fixed on the road. Trying to break the tension, he asked again, "Where do you need to go?" This time, she slowly turned her head toward him, her eyes locking onto his. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Just a little further," she said. Michael nodded, though her vague answer made him feel more uncomfortable. As they continued down the road, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Then, without warning, the woman pointed to a small, deserted turnoff. "Right here," she said, her voice eerily calm. Michael hesitated. The road she was pointing to was a dirt path leading into a dark forested area. It didn't look like a place anyone should be going, especially this late at night. But he didn't want to upset her, so he complied, turning the car down the narrow road. After a few minutes of driving in silence, the woman suddenly spoke again. "This is where I need to get off," she whispered. Michael slowed the car, glancing around. There was nothing but trees and shadows. He couldn't see a house or any sign of civilization. "Are you sure?" he asked, growing more anxious by the second. The woman didn't reply. She simply opened the door and stepped out of the car, disappearing into the darkness without another word. Michael sat there, stunned, watching as her figure vanished among the trees. A chill ran down his spine, but he shook it off, telling himself she must know the area better than he did. He drove away, eager to put the strange encounter behind him. But as he glanced into the rearview mirror, his heart stopped. The woman was sitting in the back seat, staring at him through the reflection. Panicking, Michael swerved the car to the side of the road, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He turned around to confront her, but the back seat was empty. The woman was gone. Shaking, Michael sped the rest of the way home, refusing to look in the mirror again. When he finally reached his house, he did some research on the area where he had picked her up. He found an old story about a woman who had died in a car crash on that very road years ago. Since then, Drivers had reported seeing her hitchhiking, only for her to vanish once they picked her up. Michael had encountered the vanishing hitchhiker, and to this day, he refuses to drive that road at night. Late-night drives through the city can be relaxing, until you feel like you're being watched. Or worse, followed. What started as a simple trip home for Kate turned into a nightmare she could never have predicted. It was around 11 p.m. when Kate finished her shift at the diner. She was exhausted, ready to get home, take a shower, and collapse into bed. The drive home was familiar, mostly quiet streets, lit only by the occasional street lamp. As she turned onto the main road, something caught her eye in the rearview mirror. A car was behind her, its headlights bright in the dark night. At first, she didn't think much of it. It wasn't uncommon to see other cars this time of night. But as she continued driving, she noticed something strange. No matter how many turns she made, the car stayed right behind her, following her every move. Kate's heart began to race. She switched lanes, hoping the car would pass, but it didn't. It stayed right on her tail. Trying to stay calm, she took a few random turns, testing to see if the car was really following her. But with each turn, the headlights remained in her rearview mirror, uncomfortably close. The street was dark, and there were no other cars around. Kate's mind raced with possibilities. Was it just a coincidence? Was she being paranoid? Or was someone really following her? Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as she sped up, trying to put some distance between her and the mysterious car. But the faster she drove, the faster the car followed. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. The roads were empty, and the sense of isolation made her feel even more vulnerable. Kate tried to think of what to do next. Should she pull over and confront whoever was behind her? No, that was too dangerous. Should she drive to the police station? Just as she was about to make a turn toward the station, the car behind her suddenly sped up, pulling alongside her. Kate glanced over, her heart racing with fear. The driver was obscured by shadows, but she could feel their gaze locked on her. For a brief moment, they drove side by side, the tension unbearable. Then, without warning, the car swerved violently toward her, forcing Kate to slam on her brakes. She veered off the road, narrowly avoiding a crash, her car skidding to a stop in the gravel. Her hands were shaking, her mind racing with fear. The other car sped away, disappearing into the night as quickly as it had appeared. Kate sat there for a moment, trying to calm her racing heart. She had no idea who that person was or why they had been following her. All she knew was that she had narrowly escaped something far worse. She drove home, her eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirror the entire way. From that night on, Kate never drove home alone late at night again, always making sure someone knew where she was. But the memory of those headlights trailing her, and the mysterious driver who tried to run her off the road, haunts her to this day. Highway driving can be unnerving at night, long stretches of dark road, isolated from civilization. But for David, an ordinary drive down an empty highway became a terrifying encounter with something that couldn't be explained. David had been driving for hours, heading back to his hometown after visiting some friends out of state. It was late, almost 2 a.m., and the highway was completely deserted. There were no other cars in sight, just endless stretches of road illuminated by his headlights. The only sound was the hum of his engine and the occasional rumble of his tires over cracks in the asphalt. Despite the solitude, David felt at ease. He enjoyed the peacefulness of night driving, the quiet and the space to think. But as he drove further into the night, something strange happened. In the distance, he saw a pair of headlights approaching. They seemed to be coming up fast behind him. At first, David thought nothing of it. It was just another vehicle passing through the night. But as the headlights got closer, he realized they belonged to a large truck, a semi, judging by the height of the lights. The truck barreled down the highway, coming up behind David at an alarming speed. He shifted lanes, expecting the truck to pass him, but instead, it stayed right behind him, its headlights glaring in his rearview mirror. David's stomach tightened with unease. He sped up slightly, hoping to create some distance, but the truck matched his speed. It stayed on his tail, uncomfortably close, its engine roaring behind him. David's mind raced. What was this truck doing? Why wasn't it passing him? He switched lanes again, but the truck followed, maintaining its aggressive position. His heart began to race as the truck seemed to grow closer and closer, almost as if it was trying to force him off the road. David's hands gripped the wheel tightly as he pressed down on the accelerator, speeding up to get away. But the truck wasn't letting up. Its headlights were blinding, its presence menacing. Suddenly, the truck swerved into the other lane and pulled alongside David's car. For a brief moment, he could see the massive vehicle next to him, its hulking frame casting shadows on the road. But when David glanced over to see the driver, there was no one behind the wheel. His heart skipped a beat. He stared in disbelief, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. The truck, massive and fully operational, had no driver. In a panic, David slammed on his brakes, pulling his car to the side of the road as the truck sped ahead, disappearing into the darkness. For a few moments, he sat there, shaking, his breath coming in short gasps. He had no explanation for what had just happened. When he finally gathered the courage to continue driving, David kept his speed slow and steady, his eyes constantly darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting the phantom truck to reappear. But it never did. David later learned that several other drivers had reported similar experiences on that stretch of highway, a truck with no driver, appearing out of nowhere, terrorizing drivers before vanishing into the night. To this day, he refuses to drive that highway after dark, haunted by the memory of the phantom truck and the terror of that night. These stories remind us that the open road at night is filled with mysteries. It's not just the darkness or the isolation that can be terrifying, it's the unknown, the things we can't explain, that truly haunt us. Always stay alert, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the dangers that may lurk on the road. Because sometimes, it's not just other drivers you have to worry about.